Hey guys, tonight we begin with the strange truth that your modern routine still carries fingerprints of medieval life. The little gestures you never question, the polite habits you repeat automatically. They all have roots in a world shaped by suspicion, superstition, and the fear that someone might curse your soup. When you take a seat a certain way or offer a toast, you might be unknowingly repeating the same motions a villager once used to avoid getting stabbed in a tavern. So before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable. Let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You step into these lingering rules without even noticing at first. The way you slip into your shoes each morning without stopping to wonder why they are always by the door and never somewhere more imaginative. The world around you hums with ordinary sounds, the soft shuffle of your own steps, the quiet clatter of dishes, the familiar rhythm of daily life. Yet underneath that normal surface, tiny medieval ghosts tug gently at your sleeves, guiding your actions with habits that outlive the people who invented them. You do not question them. You just move through them as if your body has memorized a script written centuries before you arrived. You notice it the moment you sit down at a table. You pull your seat in neatly, hands arranged in that calm, socially acceptable way that keeps you from looking like you might start a brawl. You do not know it, but your posture echoes. Villagers who once kept their elbows tucked in to avoid knocking over precarious clay cups. A single spill could mean ruined clothing, wasted ale, or an offended neighbor who would talk about you for the next 3 harvests. So, you learn the same tidy movements without ever realizing their origin. You glance at someone across the room and offer a polite nod, a gesture so small it feels insignificant. But that tiny dip of the head is the distilled descendant of a much louder ritual, one that required people to show the full length of their throat to prove they were not hiding a blade. You do not bare your throat in quite the same dramatic fashion, but the instinct to signal friendliness stays with you. It clings to you like a faint scent you cannot wash off, even with all the soap the medieval world never had. You hold open a door for someone, not because you have calculated a moral score, but because the gesture feels baked into your bones. Once doorways were choke points where trouble could spark with frightening speed. The person who stepped through first had a momentary advantage. So offering that space became a sign of goodwill. Now you do it without thinking, offering peace to strangers in grocery stores and office buildings without ever knowing the original stakes involved. You choose where to stand when speaking to someone, drifting to a familiar distance that feels natural. You do not stand too close unless you mean it. And you do not drift too far unless you are trying to escape. That quiet dance comes from a time when stepping too close meant you might be challenging someone to a fight, or worse, allowing them easy access to your purse. The medieval world taught people to maintain a careful bubble of safety. And even though the dangers have changed, you still honor that invisible boundary every day. Every small motion becomes a reminder that you are a patchwork of past centuries. You raise a hand in greeting as if returning a signal from travelers who once needed to show their empty palms on dusty roads. You hush your voice in certain places, echoing the old rules of speaking softly near hearths so as not to disturb ancestors or risk spreading gossip too thinly. You follow patterns you never chose, inherited from people whose lives were shaped by uncertainty, superstition, and the need to keep peace in crowded stone rooms. Yet these remnants cling to you gently. They do not weigh you down. They move with you, quiet and harmless, leaving you with mannerisms that feel entirely your own, even though they were borrowed long before you were born. They are small threads from an age that has faded into shadow, still woven into the fabric of your everyday choices. You move through them with each passing moment, unaware of how many ancient hands guide your steps. You find yourself standing in line again, shuffling forward with that slow, collective determination shared by everyone trapped in the same quiet wait. It feels ordinary, almost boring, the kind of moment you dismiss without a second thought. Yet beneath the stillness lies a faint echo of a time when waiting your turn was not simply polite. It was the only thing preventing chaos from swallowing an entire marketplace whole. You can almost feel the distant tug of that old world as you take another small step forward. The sound of your shoes tapping against the floor like a soft reminder of footsteps that once crunched through muddy streets. You imagine a medieval market long before anyone invented the idea of personal space, where every seller shouted over every other seller and the air buzzed with the smell of livestock, sweat, spices, and the occasional questionable cheese. People surged around stalls like waves that had never heard of manners. Elbows out, baskets swinging, voices raised as if volume alone could secure a better deal. In that kind of environment, any hope of fairness had the lifespan of a loaf of bread left in the sun. So, someone somewhere decided people had to stand in a single line or risk being trampled by a cart full of carrots. You did not ask for this tradition, but here you are centuries later holding a coffee and copying their invention perfectly. You glance at the person in front of you and immediately perform that ancient calculation, estimating how much faster the other line is moving. This instinct has roots as deep as any superstition. Once if you pick the wrong cluster of waiting villagers, you might lose your chance to buy the last bit of fresh produce before someone else scooped it up. You still feel a faint echo of that tension, even though the stakes now involve nothing more dangerous than the last pain. Oh, chocolat. Still, the impulse remains buzzing in your chest like a leftover spark no one bothered to extinguish. You notice how everyone maintains a quiet order. Each person stacked neatly behind the next, hands tucked close as if trying not to disturb a delicate balance. No one barges. By forward, no one shouts. You all share a wordless agreement shaped by ancestors who learned that the quickest path to disaster was letting a crowd decide collectively that rules were optional. The medieval market was a place where tempers flared easily and where livestock refused to cooperate on principle. Without lines, the entire scene teetered on the brink of becoming a very loud, very chaotic free-for-all. You inch forward again, guided by invisible signals that have survived centuries of change. You keep a respectful distance from the person ahead, a behavior once meant to protect you from flailing elbows or sudden disputes about who saw what first. Even now, when all you risk is a mildly awkward moment, your body obeys the rule without question. The line moves slow but steady, a fragile order preserved by a collective desire to avoid becoming those chaotic crowds from long ago. You do not think about any of this as you wait. You simply fall into place, part of a chain stretching from the present back into the noisy dust of medieval streets. Each small step you take is a reluctant nod to the people who invented queues out of necessity, trying to bring sanity to a world that rarely cooperated. And whether you know it or not, you continue their work every time you take your spot, fold your hands, and wait for your turn. Like countless unnamed marketgoers before you, you reach out your hand without thinking, offering that familiar shake you have performed countless times. It feels ordinary, almost automatic, the way your fingers wrap around another person's and you give that small practiced pump. But somewhere in the background of your mind, you sense the faint trace of tension that once lived inside this gesture, long before it became a polite greeting. The handshake was a cautious inspection, a subtle check to confirm the other person was not about to introduce you to a hidden blade. You imagine a medieval meeting on a dusty road, two strangers approaching to each other with the kind of slow precision, usually reserved for animals, deciding whether they are about to fight or share a patch of grass. Each person would keep a careful distance, shoulders angled just enough to pivot if the situation soured. Then, when both decided they were probably not here to cause mayhem, they would extend an empty right hand, palm open, fingers visible. There was no warmth in it, only strategy. You showed your hand to prove you held no knife, and the other person did the same. The handshake began as a small moment of mutual suspicion, disguised as courtesy. You still feel the echoes of that suspicion, even if you do not recognize it. When someone refuses a handshake, a tiny unease flickers in you, the faintest spark of an instinct that once kept people alive. Your brain whispers that something feels off, even if the danger is non-existent. It is the same ancient alert system that once evaluated strangers based on their posture, their eyes, and whether they were keeping one hand suspiciously tucked behind a cloak. When your hand clasps someone else's, you feel the subtle give of their grip, the soft movement of their tendons, the small shared moment of trust. You forget that people once used this contact not just to check for weapons, but to jostle an opponent's sleeve, ensuring no narrow blade was strapped beneath it. If the other person's sleeve felt too rigid, or if they tensed the wrong way, the handshake could shift rapidly into an entirely different kind of encounter. Today, your only risk is an overly enthusiastic grip that makes your knuckles pop. Yet, the ritual still carries the weight of its origin. You notice how everyone has an opinion on the proper way to shake hands. Too limp, and you seem suspicious or unsure. Too strong, and you seem aggressive. Too long, and you feel like you are signing an unspoken agreement you never intended to join. All of these little critiques are framed as modern etiquette, yet they trace back to medieval assessments of confidence, honesty, and potential threat. A weak grip made people wonder what you were hiding. An overly firm one implied you were trying to show dominance. The perfect handshake balanced both sides in a neutral truce. You move through your day carrying this ancient habit without questioning it. You offer your hand to seal deals, to greet friends, to show respect. You do it in bright office buildings, on quiet sidewalks, in moments that have nothing to do with survival. Yet the gesture still holds a shadow of its old meaning. You are showing your empty hand just as clearly as those long-forgotten travelers once did. You are signaling that you come in peace. Even if all you want is to say hello, you lift your glass without thinking, tilting it towards someone else in a small ritual you have repeated so many times it barely registers. The soft clink rings out bright and gentle. A sound so familiar it feels like part of the atmosphere of any shared drink. You smile. They smile. And for a moment it seems like nothing more than a polite gesture, a pleasant little tradition meant to mark a moment of connection. Yet beneath that delicate sound lies a far older and far more suspicious origin, one soaked in medieval paranoia and the constant fear that the person across from you might be trying to end your evening in a very permanent way. You imagine a long wooden table in a candlelit hall, the air thick with the scent of roasted meat, smoke, and too many unwashed tunics. Two people sit across from each other, each holding a cup that has seen far more use than cleaning. Trust is scarce, and alliances are fragile enough that even a shared drink feels like a gamble. In a world where disputes could escalate quickly, and where poison was the favored tool of anyone who lacked either strength or patience, every sip carried a hint of danger. So someone came up with a method to reassure both sides. A noisy little collision of cups intended to slush wine from one vessel into the other. If either drink hid something sinister, both would now share the same fate. You no longer fling your drink around with such dramatic flair, partly because modern cups are not built for combat, and partly because most people prefer their beverages inside the glass rather than on the table. Still, the motion survives in gentler form. When you clink your glass against another's, there is no spill, no splash of mingled liquid, but the symbolic echo remains. You are reenacting a moment of mutual reassurance created in an age where suspicion was a daily companion. You notice how the act brings a small lift of cheer to the room, a moment of shared acknowledgement that everyone here is safe, welcome, and ready to enjoy the drink in front of them. This warmth hides the old tension that once lurked under the surface. Even now, if someone refuses to clink their glass, a faint awkwardness creeps in. It is an instinct older than logic, a tiny voice inherited from ancestors who studied every gesture for signs of ill intent. You do not accuse anyone of plotting against you. Yet the absence of the clink feels like a step out of rhythm, as if the ritual failed to complete itself. You sense how deeply that sense of shared trust runs. When glasses meet, you are wordlessly saying that you expect no trick, no treachery, nothing hidden beneath the surface. You mark the moment with sound, something bright and fleeting that proves both of you are here with honest intentions. Your modern world rarely requires this level of symbolic reassurance, but you still follow the script as faithfully as those long-gone travelers and feasting nobles once did. You take your sip afterward with an ease those medieval drinkers would envy, certain that no one has laced your wine with anything more dangerous than a slightly too strong pour. Yet the gesture lingers thin as the ring of glass in the air, reminding you that even in the smallest act of celebration, you carry echoes of an older world. When your drink meets someone else's, you honor a fragile ancient piece forged not from trust, but from the need to create it. You sit at a table without hesitation, sliding into your seat, as if the rules guiding your every movement were written somewhere deep in your bones. The napkin placement, the careful handling of utensils, the polite patience as food arrives, all of it feels normal to you. Yet each gesture comes from a world that had far more pressing concerns than whether someone chewed too loudly. Medieval meals were loud, crowded, unpredictable events filled with superstition, suspicion, and hygiene standards that would cause a modern health inspector to quietly sit down and weep. You imagine a great wooden table stretching across a smoky hall, the surface stained by generations of spills and knife marks. People crowd onto long benches, jostling for space, while dogs weave between their feet, hoping for dropped scraps. Everyone eats from shared trenches carved from stale bread because plates were an invention still somewhere far off in the future. The rules that grew out of this setting were not designed to make a meal more elegant. They were created to prevent outright disaster. Every motion had a reason, usually involving preventing illness, avoiding accidental offense, or making sure no one mistook a friendly neighbor for someone attempting to stab them with a carving knife. You picture yourself in that world for a moment, holding a spoon that has not been washed since sometime in spring. There is a reason medieval people were so particular about which hand touched what. You kept your eating hand sacred, the loyal companion that never wandered into tasks too filthy to name. To break this rule would cause real panic, not because someone would scold you about etiquette, but because it could spread illness through a village faster than gossip through a tavern. Even now, you instinctively choose one hand for your fork, keeping the other free for tasks. Unaware of how ancient that rhythm truly is, you notice how you never point your knife at anyone across the table. It is an unspoken rule you follow without effort, born from the very reasonable medieval belief that waving a blade in someone's direction was usually the first step toward a brawl. Back then, people watched the angle of your knife the way modern people watch facial expressions, and a careless gesture could send the entire table into defensive mode before the bread reached the center. Even the simple act of cutting food with your own personal blade came with meaning. To set it down pointed outward was to signal warning, a kind of silent announcement that you were not entirely sure of the company. You use utensils without thinking, assembling them neatly on your plate between bites, but the medieval world had few such tools. People used their hands often, but those hands followed strict, invisible rules. You could reach toward the salt only after the lord of the hall had taken his share, and you could not dig into communal dishes without showing your fingers were clean. That tiny show of cleanliness evolved slowly into the modern expectation that you behave with at least a hint of tidiness. Even your instinct to keep your elbows off the table has roots in those cramped dining halls. Elbows took up space, and space was precious. Too much spreading out could start an argument that traveled down the bench like a spark through straw. You still feel the faint echo of those superstitions in the way you handle bread or pass dishes. You never place a loaf upside down. You never reach across someone's plate without asking. Even your belief that certain table behaviors bring good or bad luck comes from villagers who blamed crooked forks and spilled salt for everything from failed harvests to strange dreams. Their fears may be long gone, but the rituals remain tucked into your daily habits like crumbs caught in a tablecloth. And so you eat your meal today with clean plates, quiet order, and no lurking threat of sudden chaos. Yet every polite gesture, every instinctive movement is a leftover fragment from a time when sharing a table meant trusting the people beside you, not only with conversation, but with your life. You greet people all the time without pausing to consider the strange choreography behind it, the little tilts of your head, the polite curve of a smile, the steady tone of your voice. These gestures feel instinctive, stitched into your routine like background fabric you never inspect too closely. Yet each small movement carries centuries of practice shaped by a world obsessed with class, reputation, and making sure the person approaching you is not about to swing a weapon in your direction. You do not think about danger when you say hello, but your medieval ancestors certainly did. You can almost picture the scene. A dirt road winding between fields. Two travelers approaching each other with a slow caution that has nothing to do with politeness and everything to do with survival. Every step brings questions. Is this person armed? Are they angry? Do they look like someone who has unresolved issues that a stranger might accidentally trigger by breathing too loudly? In that world, a greeting was not simply a friendly start. It was the first test, a signal that you had come with peaceful intentions rather than trouble tucked beneath your cloak. So you raised your hand in a casual wave when you meet someone today, unaware that this motion once served as evidence that your palm held nothing sharp. The higher you lifted your hand, the safer everyone felt. Some medieval greetings were far more theatrical, involving entire flourishes of the arm, meant to show off the total absence of concealed objects. You do not go quite that far anymore, but the instinct lingers. Even a modern wave carries the faint imprint of those anxious encounters. You notice how your posture shifts during greetings. You stand a little straighter, soften your tone, and offer a smile designed to ease tension before it even forms. This subtle performance began in crowded medieval towns where strangers from different ranks navigated narrow streets. A wrong gesture could be interpreted as disrespect, and disrespect had a way of turning minor disagreements into full-scale chaos. The safest route was to show you knew your place, whether highborn or lowborn, and that you had no intention of challenging anyone's position in the social food chain. Your modern world no longer requires you to calculate ranks so intensely, yet you still feel that ancient pull toward deference or assertiveness depending on the person standing before you. You remember how some greetings in old villages involved small bows, gentle dips that revealed the vulnerable curve of the neck. It was not just a sign of respect, it was a demonstration of trust. To lower your head, even briefly, meant you believed the other person would not take advantage of the opening. You do not bow now, at least not in daily life. But you nod. That tiny tilt carries the same ancient whisper of trust. A momentary surrender of awareness that no longer feels dangerous, but still follows the same blueprint. You greet friends with warmth, strangers with polite distance, and elders with softened tones. These instincts stretch back centuries. Medieval people judged intentions instantly, studying faces for hints of friendliness or hidden grudges. You do the same, though you call it reading body language instead of survival. You measure moods, evaluate presence, and adjust your greeting accordingly, unaware of how old that behavior truly is. Every hello you offer is a quiet relic of a time when greetings did not just open conversations. They prevented conflicts. They eased suspicion. They kept fragile peace from shattering in dusty streets and crowded halls. And even now, as you move through a world far safer than the one that shaped these rituals, you carry the echoes of those ancient introductions in every tilt of your head and every gentle smile. You lower your head in a small nod without thinking, a quiet gesture you perform countless times each day. It feels effortless, a simple acknowledgement with no sharp edges. Yet the motion carries the ghost of a world where misunderstandings were not just embarrassing, they were combustible. In medieval streets, a single wrong glance could spark trouble faster than a spilled drink in a crowded tavern. And the smallest hint of disrespect had the potential to end with someone dramatically sword fighting in a field for reasons neither participant fully remembered. You imagine a narrow cobblestone lane, two men approaching each other with a stiff posture of people who have spent far too much time practicing how not to seem threatening. Both carry weapons because that was simply part of the outfit back then. Like an accessory no one wanted but everyone wore. When they draw close, the risk rises. One wrong move, one overly confident stare, and suddenly both are reaching for their hilts. The only thing standing between them and an accidental duel is a quick modest bow or a gentle nod meant to signal peace before anyone's pride decides to run the show. You feel echoes of that instinct in yourself. When someone steps into your path today, you offer a polite nod, a tiny lowering of the head that would look almost silly to those old villagers, but still accomplishes the same thing. It shows you are not here to challenge anyone, that you come with good intentions, that no hidden meaning trembles beneath the surface of your expression. You angle your gaze slightly downward, softening your presence the way countless medieval travelers once did when crossing paths with someone whose opinion of them could shift abruptly and occasionally fatally. You picture how elaborate some of those old bows once were. A nobleman might dip just enough to acknowledge another noble's rank, but not enough to imply he was inferior. A commoner might bow lower to avoid offending someone who could easily make their life miserable. The social mathematics of these gestures became so precise that getting the angle wrong could cause disputes before anyone even reached the meal they were headed toward. You do not bow like that anymore, but your nods still carry the faint blueprint of these complicated calculations. You catch yourself offering a small nod to a stranger who holds a door for you, a gesture so quick it barely registers. Yet even this simple moment follows the same ancient choreography. You are letting them know you appreciate the gesture, that you recognize their role in this tiny exchange of courtesy, and that neither of you has any intention of escalating into conflict over something as ridiculous as doorway precedences. Medieval people might have used slightly more dramatic motions, but the purpose remains the same. In crowded places, you instinctively perform another version of this ritual. When you weave through a group of people, you tilt your head and give short, repeated nods. You soften your expression. You make yourself appear agreeable, approachable, harmless. Those ancient instincts whisper through your behavior, even though the stakes today are nothing more than avoiding minor awkwardness. Once, however, the stakes were far higher, and these gentle gestures prevented quick tempers from spiraling into steel and shouting. You lower your head one last time in your mind's eye, imagining how many lives were probably saved by a simple bow. It was a gesture that bridged misunderstandings long before people invented detailed explanations or impartial referees. And so you carry it with you now, subtle and stripped of danger, a delicate inheritance from a world where the wrong nod could end a quiet afternoon, but the right one could keep the peace. You get dressed without considering that each piece of clothing carries a story older than the fabric itself. You reach for certain colors, certain cuts, certain combinations that feel appropriate for the place you are going. You do not think about why they feel appropriate. You just know they do. The way you know not to wear pajamas to a job interview unless you are committed to chaos. Yet beneath those choices lives a secret language crafted in medieval towns where clothing was not just decoration. It was a code, a social map, and sometimes an early warning system designed to help people avoid disastrous misunderstandings. You imagine walking through a medieval village where every stitch on every person tells a story. Colors are not simply preferred, they are controlled. Deep reds and rich purples belong to the wealthy because dyeing fabric in those shades required either access to rare materials or the willingness to bankrupt yourself for a single outfit. A farmer wearing royal purple would create the same reaction as someone today, showing up to the office in a full ball gown on a random Tuesday. People would stare, whisper, and wonder which law you thought you were brave enough to ignore. You feel echoes of these rules even now. When you dress for a formal event, reaching for darker fabrics and structured clothing, you are reenacting a hierarchy that once determined who could enter noble halls without being thrown out by a guard with strong opinions. When you slip into casual clothes at home, soft fabrics and worn textures, you mirror the old divide between the workday tunic and the garment reserved for resting by the hearth. The instinct to dress differently, depending on who might see you, has roots far deeper than you realize. You can picture medieval people studying each other's clothing the way you study someone's tone of voice. A belt worn too low could signal arrogance. Shoes too polished implied an attempt to climb socially without permission. Even hats came with rules. Some signaled rank, others signaled trade, and a few existed solely to warn the world that the wearer had very strong feelings about their place in society. You do not have to navigate these exact signals anymore, but you still read outfits instinctively, sensing mood, status, confidence, or careful intention in the way someone dresses. You find yourself adjusting your appearance before stepping into certain spaces, smoothing fabric, straightening collars, making sure everything looks just right. This impulse dates back to medieval gatherings where clothes were often the only way to show that you belonged, that you respected the gathering, and that you understood the social script. No one wanted to arrive at a feast dressed incorrectly only to discover that their choice of color accidentally announced political allegiance to the wrong family. Even small modern habits echo the old rules. The way you avoid pairing certain patterns comes from medieval guilds that used uniforms to mark trade and skill. The instinct to remove your hat indoors mirrors a gesture of humility once meant to show that you were disarming yourself quite literally, because some hats concealed small blades or heavy metal fittings. The expectation that certain outfits fit certain times of day reflects an ancient belief that improper clothing could upset spirits or offend local officials with far too much free time. You move through these inherited rules without noticing them, dressing in layers of meaning, stitched by people who lived in a world filled with suspicion, order, and a firm belief that fabric could tell the truth even when people did not. Your choices feel modern, but they carry the quiet hum of old customs. Every button, every color, every instinctive adjustment connects you to a forgotten code that shaped society long before fashion became a form of expression. Even now, you walk through your day wrapped in the faint echoes of medieval expectations, woven into the threads of everything you wear. You watch a wedding unfold, and everything feels familiar, almost comforting, as if the rituals were always meant to be this way. The white clothing, the slow walk down the aisle, the gathering of family members who pretend not to notice how uncomfortable their shoes are. You settle into the rhythm of it without questioning why any of it exists. Yet each gesture, each tradition carries the weight of countless generations that shaped weddings not around romance, but around survival, alliances, and the need to keep peace in villages where gossip spread faster than fire in a thatched roof. You imagine a small medieval settlement where weddings served purposes far beyond celebration. Families gathered not just to bless a union, but to observe the forging of alliances that might prevent feuds or strengthen harvest deals. Each smile was measured, each handshake carefully noted, as if every villager silently evaluated whether this match would reduce tension or spark new trouble. Even the choice of day mattered. Couples married when the weather cooperated because a muddy field could turn an entire ceremony into a communal disaster no one wanted to repeat. You picture the bride stepping forward wearing whatever fabric her family could manage. Not an immaculate white gown, but a dress chosen for durability and meaning. Colors represented moods, fortunes, or hopeful omens. The idea of wearing white would arrive centuries later, but the pressure to appear presentable in front of so many watchful eyes was already there. Villagers judged cleanliness as a sign of respect, even though their own standards of hygiene would make a modern wedding planner stare into the distance and reconsider life choices. You see, the origins of the aisle in the narrow lanes of these villages. The bride walked flanked by her family, not because it looked elegant, but because this was the safest way to guide her through tightly packed streets. People wanted a clear view, and crowding too close could spark disputes with neighbors who took personal offense at being elbowed during such an important moment. The walk itself became a symbolic journey, moving her from one household to another, witnessed by the entire community that would hold both families accountable for whatever came next. You think about the exchange of rings, a gesture that now feels warm and symbolic, but once had deeply practical undertones. A ring signified binding agreements far more serious than romance. In some villages, it stood as a physical marker of a bargain made between families. Rings were often crude, made from simple metals, but they represented something unbreakable, something that even the most stubborn relative could not deny. Once the ceremony concluded, you watch guests gather for food and realize medieval feasting shaped this part, too. A wedding feast was not a polite meal. It was a test of generosity, status, and community strength. Families stretched their resources to provide enough food for everyone, sometimes sacrificing weeks of supplies to preserve honor. The feast served as proof that the union benefited more than just the couple. It bound the community together, at least for a night, under shared bread and shared stories. You sense the faint threads of those pressures even now. When people debate seating arrangements or worry about hurt feelings, they echo medieval concerns where avoiding offense was a survival skill. When families meet awkwardly but politely, you see the remnants of alliances that once held villages together. When the couple takes hands and steps into their future, you witness a ritual far older than flowers or rings. A ritual born from the need to unite not just two people, but two worlds. And so you watch the ceremony unfold, unaware that beneath the polished surface lies the long shadow of crowded villages, fragile peace, and deals forged in the flicker of torchlight. You wake on your birthday to messages, candles, and the familiar chorus of people insisting you celebrate another lap around the sun. It feels harmless, cheerful, a ritual so ordinary you barely question why anyone sings at you while you stand there smiling awkwardly over a dessert set on fire. Yet beneath the warmth of it all lies a history woven through centuries of superstition, fear, and a sincere belief that invisible spirits became unusually nosy on the anniversary of your birth. You are not thinking about the supernatural as you make a wish, but the medieval world certainly was. You picture a small village pressed together by weathered fences and stubborn roofs, a place where every sound traveled through walls, and every unexplained creak made people glance nervously toward the shadows. Birthdays were not simply milestones. They were moments when a person's spirit was believed to be vulnerable, softened somehow by the cosmic memory of the day they entered the world. Villagers thought malicious forces lurked nearby on such days, hoping to slip close enough to cause mischief or stir up illness. The solution was simple in theory and chaotic in practice. Make enough noise and light enough flames to scare anything troublesome away. You imagine the first version of a birthday gathering, friends and family crowded around a table, not to admire a beautifully decorated cake, but to create a barrier of laughter and clamor so overwhelming that any wandering spirit would think twice before approaching. People banged pots, shouted blessings, and wished the grant good fortune with the kind of frantic enthusiasm usually reserved for chasing a fox out of a hen house. Their goal was protection, not celebration. The louder the group, the safer the honored person would be. Even now, when people sing loudly and slightly off-key, you feel a faint echo of that old logic. The noise, the attention, the collective energy, it all carries the distant purpose of safety. Candles, too, come from this uneasy world. You place them delicately atop your cake, but medieval villagers used them as shields of light, each flame a miniature guardian meant to push back the dark. Light was precious then, a force believed to repel spirits and bring luck. When you lean in to blow the candles out, it feels playful. Yet long ago, the extinguished smoke carried your whispered wish upward, a small message to forces beyond understanding. You never think about this when you close your eyes and make your wish, but the moment still feels strangely sacred, as if some quiet thread connects your breath to the old rituals that shaped the tradition. Even the idea of giving gifts traces back to a belief that birthdays attracted danger. Offerings were meant to strengthen the person on their vulnerable day, surrounding them with symbolic protection. A gift was not just a nice gesture. It was spiritual reinforcement handed over with the hope that the combined goodwill of the community could shield someone from unseen threats. Now gifts come wrapped in patterned paper and bright ribbons, but a sliver of that protective instinct lingers in every box handed across a table. You smile through the familiar motions, unaware that each element of the celebration is a softened version of rituals created by people who lived in constant negotiation with forces they could not see. You feel joy in the attention rather than fear, comfort in the candles rather than protection, delight in the gifts rather than caution. Yet the roots remain, hiding beneath layers of modern sweetness. What you experience as a cheerful tradition was once a determined effort to keep danger at bay for one special vulnerable day. You hand someone a gift and feel a small warmth bloom in your chest. The familiar satisfaction of offering something chosen with care. You expect a smile, maybe a laugh, maybe a grateful hug. You do not expect a ledger to appear or for someone to tally your contribution as part of a larger economic arrangement. Yet in the medieval world, gifts were not gentle gestures of affection. They were obligations, debts in decorative disguise, woven deeply into the system that held feudal society together. You might give a present today because you want to, but your distant ancestors gave them because not giving one could turn life very uncomfortable very quickly. You imagine a lord seated in a drafty hall, distributing favors not from generosity, but because doing so bound his vassals tightly to him. A gift was never simply an object. It was a reminder of loyalty, a physical anchor tying someone to the giver. If you received a cloak or a small parcel of grain, you accepted an unspoken contract. You owed something in return. The feudal world ran on these exchanges. Each gift a cog in a machine built from duty, hierarchy, and the constant need to keep everyone aware of their place. You did not thank the giver. You calculated the implications. You picture a villager offering a small basket of produce to a neighbor, not because they felt a sudden burst of kindness, but because they expected assistance during harvest season or hoped the neighbor would keep quiet about a wandering goat that had absolutely not trespassed into someone else's garden. Gifts were woven into negotiations. each one a subtle attempt to tilt relationships in a useful direction. Even celebrations became transactional. Weddings, births, and seasonal festivals all required offerings that demonstrated cooperation. To fail at this could mark you as unreliable, which was a dangerous reputation in a world where survival depended on community. You sense the echoes of those obligations in modern life, even if the stakes are less dramatic. When you receive a gift, a tiny part of you begins calculating. Should you match the value? When it is your turn, should you exceed it? Should you pretend you had planned something all along? Beneath your polite enthusiasm sits the faint pressure of ancient reciprocity. You may not be worried about crop assistance or militia support, but you still understand the social equation. A gift creates a thread, and threads tug. You think about holidays, how people exchange presents in tangled rounds that somehow feel both joyful and vaguely strategic. Medieval people would recognize the pattern immediately. Entire feasts revolved around presenting items to reinforce status or to flatter someone with the power to make your year easier. Even small offerings carried heavy meaning. A poorly chosen gift could insult someone. A lavish one could imply ambition. A missing one could ignite suspicion that you no longer respected the bond. You unwrap a present today with delight rather than caution. But the ritual still carries the faint hum of its old purpose. When you give something, you are participating in a tradition that once balanced the entire structure of society. You follow the script because it feels right, because generosity is expected, because the action itself warms both sides. But deep beneath the ribbons and wrapping lies a history shaped by duty rather than affection. And whether you know it or not, every gift you exchange carries the faint shadow of deals forged long before kindness became part of the equation. You lift your drink during a toast without giving it much thought. The motion so practiced that your hand seems to know what to do long before your mind catches up. You wait for someone to say the familiar words. You smile on cue and you raise your glass at just the right moment. It feels lighthearted, a harmless ritual meant to spark connection. Yet beneath the cheer lies a history shaped by tavern suspicion, untrustworthy bartenders, and the persistent medieval belief that everyone was one bad sip away from an unfortunate evening. You picture a crowded tavern in a medieval town packed tightly with travelers, merchants, and a few professional troublemakers who treated the place like their natural habitat. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and ale that may or may not have been brewed with any real skill. Conversations overlap chaotically, and every corner of the room feels alive with restless energy. Trust is scarce here. People size each other up with the quick, darting glances of those who know. Fights often start faster than conversations. A drink shared among strangers is never just a drink. It is a gamble, a test, a quiet promise that no one intends to poison anyone else to settle a lingering grudge. You imagine two men clinking their wooden cups together with exaggerated force, splashing their drinks into one another's vessels. The gesture was never meant to be delicate. It was a defensive move, a way to mix both drinks so completely that any hidden toxin would divide evenly. If one person drank, both would. The logic was simple, if slightly chaotic. The more your beverage sloshed onto the table, the safer you felt. Medieval taverns were not known for subtlety. You still feel faint traces of that old tension when someone proposes a toast. Even now, the crowd softens into a shared focus. People lift their glasses, waiting for a signal. While no one fears poison, you can sense the old instinct humming beneath the surface. The idea that raising a drink together creates a brief truce. It establishes a moment where everyone agrees silently and collectively to behave. The toast becomes a pause in the noise, a tiny island of unity built from clinking glass and unspoken reassurance. Then there was the competitive side of things. Medieval drinkers were not content with quiet declarations of goodwill. They turned toasts into challenges, each person trying to outdo the last with louder cheers, bolder wishes, and wilder gestures that occasionally threatened to topple half the table. You can almost hear them shouting dramatic blessings, pounding on the wooden boards, as if they expected their enthusiasm to influence the very fate of the harvest. The louder the toast, the more you proved your strength, loyalty, and ability to remain upright after far too much ale. Modern toasts carry the softened version of these rituals. You raise your glass gently, mindful not to spill anything. Yet the symbolism lingers when you clink the rim of your glass against someone else's. You echo the old demonstration of trust. Even if your biggest concern is avoiding a tiny chip when someone gives a speech before a toast, weaving humor or sentiment into a few carefully chosen words. You hear the faint echo of those medieval competitions, the desire to say something memorable enough to earn nods around the room. You take your sip once the glasses meet, feeling the familiar warmth of the moment, unaware that this simple act was once a survival strategy, a show of camaraderie, and a way to keep reckless tavern patrons from turning the night into a disaster. The toast you share now feels gentle, polished, even sweet. But its roots are tangled deeply in a world where trust had to be proven with noise, spills, and the ancient's willingness to drink alongside someone who might or might not be your friend. And without realizing it, you carry that ancient tradition forward each time you lift your glass and let it ring softly against another. You step outside your home and fall naturally into the quiet rules of your neighborhood without ever stopping to wonder where they came from. You keep your voice a little softer in shared spaces, greet familiar faces with polite nods, and instinctively avoid doing anything that would make your neighbors raise their eyebrows. It all feels modern and reasonable, the sort of unwritten social contract everyone accepts without needing it posted on a sign. Yet, as you move through the day, you can feel the faint tug of habits shaped long ago in medieval towns where living close together required more strategy, patience, and compromise than anyone today would willingly admit. You picture a small medieval settlement packed tightly behind wooden walls, homes pressed so close that you could hear your neighbor sneeze before they even realized it was coming. Privacy was a luxury no one had, so harmony depended on an intricate set of unspoken rules. People learned quickly that if you boiled cabbage at the wrong hour or let your livestock wander freely, the entire street would talk about you for weeks. Not behind your back, directly to your face. Medieval gossip was an unstoppable force, sharp enough to shape behavior with surprising efficiency. You find traces of that world in yourself when you lower your voice while walking past open windows. In medieval towns, raised voices signaled trouble. Arguments spread through cramped streets like sparks along dry thatch, and neighbors listened closely to gauge whether they needed to intervene before someone made a poor decision involving a pitchfork. Even now, something inside you hesitates before being too loud, as if the walls around you still carry the memories of those overheard quarrels. You picture narrow lanes where waste, water, and wandering animals all had designated paths. The towns created early versions of rules about cleanliness, not because anyone was particularly fond of tidiness, but because a poorly placed bucket or carelessly emptied basin could send an entire row of houses into a collective meltdown. You feel echoes of this when you wheel your trash to the curb on the correct day or avoid leaving anything outside that might bother someone across the street. You are following the same ancient logic. Shared spaces require cooperation, otherwise chaos wins. You see the roots of modern neighborhood courtesy in the way medieval people managed noise. In a town where families lived shoulder to shoulder, nighttime sounds mattered, too much hammering while people try to sleep, too much singing after ale, too much anything, and suddenly half the street stood in your doorway offering feedback you did not ask for. Today you check the time before running a loud appliance, unaware that your peak courtesy mirrors centuries of enforced nocturnal peace. Even the way you greet neighbors carries older meaning. In medieval streets, acknowledging people signaled awareness, respect, and the promise that you would behave reasonably within the cramped boundaries you all shared. Ignoring someone could spark suspicion or imply hostility. When you offer a smile or a short hello, now you repeat that ancient truce, reaffirming the invisible agreement that everyone will exist peacefully within shouting distance. You navigate parking spaces, property lines, and noise levels with more confidence than any medieval villager could imagine. But the instincts guiding you come from a time when survival depended on cooperation and grudges lasted generations. You feel these echoes each time you act with caution, with courtesy, with that quiet awareness that you do not live alone, that your life rubs edges with other lives. And even though your world looks nothing like theirs, the old rules still nudge you gently, reminding you that harmony in close quarters was always a delicate art, shaped long ago in towns where everyone knew everyone. and no one ever truly lived out of earshot. You walk into a gathering and choose your seat with the quiet precision of someone pretending not to care while absolutely caring. You glance at the head of the table, then at the seat nearest the door, then at the one awkwardly placed in the corner where you would spend the entire evening trapped between a plant and an overenthusiastic conversationalist. No one mentions rules, yet you feel them. You avoid seats that draw too much attention. You avoid the places where you might block someone else. You avoid the strange, unlucky spots that simply feel wrong. You sit where it feels safe, comfortable, neutral, and without realizing it, you follow an instinct planted deep in medieval halls where seat placement could determine your status, your reputation, and occasionally your continued ability to breathe. You picture a long wooden table in a drafty hall, torches flickering just enough to throw suspicious shadows along the walls. Every seat here carries meaning. The head of the table belongs to someone who earns it through rank or sheer stubbornness. The seats beside them belong to allies. Farther down are people whose importance fades seat by seat like a ranking system carved silently into the wood. Choosing the wrong seat is not a minor mistake. It is a potential insult, a challenge, a declaration that you believe yourself more powerful than the person glaring at you over their cup. You imagine the tension that filled the room when someone accidentally took a seat reserved for a high-ranking guest. The hall would fall silent in that heavy, dramatic way. Only medieval silence could manage. A few people would pretend to drink while actually watching very closely. Someone else might begin edging toward the door in case things escalated. Even if the mistake was innocent, it could stir trouble faster than a spilled jug of ale. You feel a distant ripple of that anxiety today when you hover before choosing your place at a table, trying to sense whether you are about to sit somewhere you do not belong. You picture another type of seat, the one placed with its back to the door. Medieval superstition treated this position as a disaster waiting to happen, with danger always lurking in rumors, feuds, or the occasional roaming thief. Sitting where you could not watch entrances felt reckless. People avoided it instinctively, and that caution lingers inside you even now. When you enter a cafe, your eyes flick toward the seats that offer a better view. You do not think about ambushes, but your ancestors certainly did, and they left that quiet instinct stitched into your spine. There were the unlucky seats, too. The ones placed at the shadowy corners of a room where medieval people believed spirits gathered. You can almost imagine someone refusing to sit in a dim spot during a feast, whispering a quick excuse about drafts or discomfort while actually trying to avoid any supernatural eavesdroppers. You still avoid the odd, lonely corners at gatherings, not because you fear spirits, but because something about them feels socially fragile, as if choosing one might isolate you from the rhythm of the room. Even politeness today echoes the old hierarchy. You let elders choose their seats first. You leave certain places open for guests of honor. You hesitate before claiming a spot that seems too close to the center of attention, unsure whether it implies confidence or arrogance. These small decisions trace back to medieval etiquette that kept peace in rooms filled with pride, suspicion, and an acute awareness that seating arrangements could either unite a gathering or turn it into a theatrical spectacle. You sit at your chosen place, relieved, comfortable, and unaware that you have just participated in a tradition shaped by centuries of caution, superstition, and the delicate art of surviving a room full of people who cared deeply about where everyone sat. You say something optimistic, something hopeful, something that feels almost too confident. And the moment the words escape your mouth, you reach for the nearest piece of wood and tap it like a quiet personal alarm system. You do not question the motion. You do not wonder why it works. You simply do it because something in you whispers that failing to knock would invite the universe to test your luck in increasingly creative ways. It feels harmless, playful, almost superstitious in a casual modern way. Yet the instinct comes from rituals born long before you, shaped in forests where people believed the world around them, listened closely, and did not always approve. You imagine a medieval village pressed against the edge of a thick, ancient woodland. Trees tower over everything, vast and imposing, their branches creaking with voices people swore were alive. These forests were wild and unpredictable places where hunters disappeared and strange noises drifted through the dark. People believed spirits lived inside the trunks, not metaphorically, but literally, tucked behind bark, like watchful guardians with short tempers. Villagers treated these trees with respect, speaking to them with the same caution they used when addressing their local lord on a particularly moody morning. You picture someone expressing hope aloud, maybe about weather that finally seems promising or a harvest that looks surprisingly healthy. Immediately after their words, they touch the nearest wooden surface. Not lightly, not politely, they tap with purpose, believing the sound reached the spirits within, a way to say, "Please ignore what I just said, or at least do not punish me for sounding too pleased with myself." The knock acted as both apology and bribe, a small gesture to avoid inviting misfortune. You feel the echo of that fear inside yourself. When you knock on wood after saying something bold or lucky, you reenact a ritual meant to distract unseen forces. You perform it as a joke, yet part of you takes comfort in it. Something about the tap feels like closing a door you accidentally opened. You do not believe spirits lurk in your furniture, but your hand moves anyway, trained by generations who absolutely did. You picture medieval children running through a forest, playing games that involve touching trees for safety. Adults watch them with a strange seriousness because the ritual felt true even if the game did not. Touching would meant protection. It meant calling on something older and wiser. It meant acknowledging that the world was full of mysteries far larger than human understanding. You still echo that belief when you knock gently, trying to convince yourself and whatever invisible force you half believe in that you are not tempting fate. You can almost hear villagers in a smoky tavern whispering blessings and tapping beams whenever conversation drifted toward fortune. Someone would boast that their livestock had not fallen ill this season, then immediately knock the thick wooden table to avoid inviting unwanted attention from jealous spirits. Another might mention a journey without trouble, then tap the doorframe before even finishing the sentence. The habit spread from fear to custom, from custom to instinct, and from instinct to tradition that never quite faded. You knock on wood today with a smile, brushing off the gesture as unnecessary even as it brings quiet relief. The superstition has softened over the centuries, losing its sharp edges, but the instinct remains. You tap because it feels safer. You tap because your ancestors taught their children to do the same. You tap because some part of you still whispers that good fortune should never be spoken too loudly without a small offering to whatever might be listening. And in that gently repeated motion, you continue a ritual far older than you realize, one meant to keep chaos at bay. With nothing more than a touch of wood and a quiet hope that the world will leave your luck alone, you look at your calendar and notice how naturally you divide your days into times for abundance and times for restraint, as if some ancient pattern still guides you. You plan certain meals for certain days, feel a strange comfort in weekly rhythms, and instinctively avoid scheduling big gatherings on nights that feel too crowded with obligations. These habits seem ordinary, the quiet structure of a modern life. Yet beneath them lies a world shaped by medieval feasts and fasts, where the entire rhythm of society beat in a steady cycle of indulgence and discipline. You imagine stepping into a medieval village at dawn where every household wakes to the same unspoken schedule. The church bell dictates the day more firmly than any planner or phone alert. Feasts scatter through the months with almost theatrical flourish. Grand occasions that pull entire communities into shared celebration. Fasts settle between them like long, solemn shadows requiring quiet restraint and limiting indulgence. People could tell the season not by the weather, but by the mood of their meals and the energy in the streets. You picture the feasts first, tables grown beneath roasted meats, loaves of dark bread, and dishes that only appear a handful of times each year. Villagers gather shoulder to shoulder, laughing too loudly, talking too quickly, and eating as if the world itself demanded enthusiasm. These feasts were not just opportunities to eat well. They were markers of time, ways to remember the passing of months and the importance of communal unity. Even people who shared nothing else shared these meals. You feel hints of this pattern when your own year tilts toward its holidays. Something inside you expects the celebrations, the big dinners, the crowded tables. You may not roast an entire animal or brew ale in a barrel, but you feel the tug of those old instincts as you choose days for gathering and days for quiet. The medieval cycle whispers beneath your modern schedule. Then come the fasts. In the old world, fasting was not an optional personal challenge. It was a mandated rhythm shaping when people could eat meat, when they could drink, when they should step back from pleasure and lean into reflection. Entire villages soften their habits at once. Kitchens quieting, markets slowing, taverns losing some of their usual rowdiness. People adapted because the fast brought order, a structured pause that balanced the festive chaos. You recognize that instinct in yourself when you decide to reset after a stretch of celebration. You eat lighter meals. You avoid gatherings for a little while. You recharge. Modern life offers freedom. Yet, you still follow the old pattern without consciously choosing it. Your body and mind fall into the ancient pulse of feast and fast, abundance and calm, noise and quiet. You picture the medieval year again, shaped like a patchwork of celebration and restraint. The rhythm kept peace in towns where hunger, scarcity, and exhaustion lurked constantly in the background. Too many feasts could drain resources. Too many fasts could drain morale. Only the balance allowed small communities to survive the seasons without losing themselves. You can feel that balance in your own habits. You plan weeks around certain meals, certain events, certain quiet stretches. You obey internal cues shaped by people who lived long before you, people who needed structure to endure unpredictable lives. You follow their rhythm, not because you must, but because something in you still responds to the ebb and flow that once governed entire villages. And as you move through your days, always shifting between moments of indulgence and moments of stillness, you walk in step with a medieval rhythm you never consciously learned, but somehow always knew. You move through your chores with familiar rhythm, the kind that settles into your rhythm, muscles without asking permission. You sweep, you clean, you organize small things before they have the chance to become large problems. You do it because life runs smoother that way. Because the world feels steadier when your environment cooperates instead of staging a rebellion. Yet beneath every chore sits a memory older than your household, older than your routines, rooted in medieval communities where chores were not personal preferences, but shared lifelines that kept entire villages from collapsing under the weight of each season. You imagine a village waking in the gray morning light, the kind that feels cold even in memory. There is no such thing as procrastination here. Every task matters. Every pair of hands counts. And every delay carries consequences that echo through the months ahead. People rise early because the day demands it. Because livestock need tending, because fires need feeding. Because water must be carried before the sun climbs high enough to make the work unbearable. The rhythm is strict, unrelenting, shaped by the simple truth that nature does not negotiate. You feel a small echo of that urgency when you tend to your own routines. You do not risk famine by forgetting laundry or postponing errands. Yet the impulse to maintain order still hums beneath the surface. Something inside you recognizes that daily structure keeps chaos at bay. Something older whispers that when small tasks pile up, bigger problems follow. And so you keep moving through these rituals, repeating motions shaped by ancestors who once performed them not for comfort, but for survival. You picture medieval winters, long and unforgiving. Communities prepared months in advance, storing grain, preserving meat, repairing roofs before storms could tear them open. Chores were warnings made visible. A messy storeroom meant vulnerability. A poorly patched wall meant cold nights and restless sleep. Neighbors watched each other, not out of judgment, but because every household's preparedness affected the entire group. If one family ran out of resources, it became everyone's problem. Chores were stitched into the fabric of communal responsibility. You sense that instinct when you help others today. When you offer a hand without thinking, when you share tools or lend time. Modern life separates households. But remnants of the old bond linger in the quiet urge to support the people around you. Chores once kept villages alive, and some part of you still understands the power of shared effort, even if the stakes have transformed into something gentler. You imagine the cycle of seasons driving medieval life. Spring demanded planting, summer demanded tending, autumn demanded harvest, and winter demanded endurance. Each season came with its own chorus of tasks, each chore anchoring the community to the land. You can almost hear the rhythm in your own year, the subtle shifts in your routines as weather changes. You clean more deeply in some months, reorganize your space in others, prepare yourself for the quiet or busyness ahead. Your reasons are different, but the pattern remains. You picture an old villager teaching a child how to complete a task properly, not with softness, but with the seriousness of someone passing down essential knowledge. There was no room for half-efforts. A poorly tied bundle or an unfinished chore could affect everyone. And though your world is safer, you still feel the satisfaction of doing tasks well. The grounding calm of knowing you handled something before it spiraled into trouble. You finish your chores today with a small exhale, feeling the steadiness they bring. You do not think about medieval winters or fragile harvests. Yet the habits remain, shaped by countless generations who learned that routine was not a burden but a shield. And in every quiet task you complete, you honor a rhythm that once kept entire communities alive through the hardest seasons of the year. You step outside at night and feel the familiar shift in how you carry yourself, as if the darkness quietly rewrites the rules of your behavior. Your voice softens, your steps grow deliberate, and you become more aware of every sound around you. You may think of it as simple courtesy or caution, but the instinct is older than street lights and city blocks. It comes from medieval curfews created not to inconvenience people, but to keep whole communities alive when the night brought dangers no one could afford to ignore. You imagine a medieval town at dusk, the last streaks of sunlight slipping behind crooked rooftops. The moment the sky dims, everything changes. Fires burn unpredictably, thieves prefer shadows, and wandering through the streets becomes a gamble. The town watch walks its route with heavy steps, calling out the hour in voices meant to reassure honest villagers and unsettle anyone with questionable intentions. People hurry inside because the night is not a backdrop for leisure. It is a territory claimed by uncertainty. You picture the curfew bell hanging in the square, its tone carrying through every twisting alley. The ringing is not a suggestion. It is a command shaped by necessity. Once you hear it, you bank your hearth, secure your doors, and settle into whatever small circle of light your home provides. The bell tells you when to stop working, when to stop wandering, when to stop risking the kind of trouble that cannot be undone. Fires sparked easily in houses built of wood and thatch, and one careless ember could swallow a town before dawn. Curfews save lives far more often than anyone admitted out loud. You feel faint echoes of that caution when night falls in your own world. You text someone when you arrive safely. You stay aware on quiet streets. You wonder whether a noise behind you is real or your imagination sharpening itself against the dark. You do not fear marauding bands or open flames sweeping through your neighborhood. Yet the instinct to be more careful after sunset lingers inside you like a message handed down through a long line of people who survived because they respected the night. You imagine medieval families gathering close after curfew, sharing the same pockets of warmth and sound. Nighttime belonged to stories, whispered conversations, and quiet work done by candlelight. Outside the town grew still. Curfew created a shared pause, a boundary between the chaos of the day and the vulnerable silence of the hours that followed. You feel versions of this even now when you lower your voice late at night or hesitate before making noise that might ripple through your walls. Something inside you remembers when quiet meant safety, and when breaking that quiet invited the attention of watchmen, who were far more enthusiastic than anyone preferred. You picture the heavy wooden gates of the town being barred for the night. Anyone who returned too late stood outside in the dark, knocking with a mixture of impatience and fear. Those gates separated what belonged to the community from what belonged to whatever moved unseen beyond the walls. You sense a small echo of that separation when you lock your door before bed. Not because you expect danger, but because locking up feels like closing the world out for a little while. You move through nighttime with these old rules simmering beneath your choices. You walk more carefully, speak more quietly, and settle into your home as if the dark still watches you with ancient patience. Your world is brighter, safer, and filled with comforts medieval people could not imagine. Yet your instincts still follow the pattern carved by centuries of survival. And even though the curfew bell no longer rings, its memory lingers in the ways you live after sunset, shaped by a time when the night demanded respect and the towns that obeyed it endured. You open your door to a guest and instantly feel yourself slide into the soft choreography of hospitality. You offer a greeting, a place to sit, something to drink, something to nibble on, all before you even think about whether you actually have snacks or whether you are now committed to improvising with whatever you find in the back of a cupboard. You do it because it feels polite, expected, almost instinctive. Yet beneath the politeness lies a tradition shaped in medieval worlds where receiving a stranger carried as much risk as it did virtue, and hospitality was less about comfort and more about proving your honor before anyone questioned it. You imagine a medieval traveler approaching a village at dusk, exhausted and dust-covered, carrying the hesitant energy of someone who does not entirely trust the place but has no real choice. Strangers were mysteries then, potential threats, potential allies, potential disasters if you chose wrong. A visitor could bring stories or plague, news or trouble, and every household measured the possibilities with quiet calculation. Welcoming them required courage. Refusing them required even more. The rules of hospitality grew from this delicate balance. You picture a hearth glowing inside a cramped wooden house. The homeowner stands tall, shoulders squared in that stiff medieval posture that says, "I am generous, but do not test me." Inviting someone inside meant opening your world, showing that you were not hiding anything, proving that you lived honorably with nothing tucked in the shadows. Offering bread and drink served as a declaration that you wished no harm. These gestures were not optional niceties. They were survival tactics disguised as warmth. You feel a distant echo of that seriousness when you tidy a room before someone arrives, as if revealing a messy home might betray something deeper than dust. Medieval hosts believed their reputation lived inside their hearth. A clean space suggested discipline. A well-fed guest implied generosity. Hosting became a sort of subtle performance, a way to reassure visitors that you were trustworthy. And if trust faltered, in those days, conflict followed faster than anyone wanted. You imagine shared meals unfolding with the stiff caution of a rehearsal. The host offers food first, proving it is safe. The guest accepts politely, showing they are willing to follow the rules of the house. Conversation begins slowly, each person watching the other for hints of danger or insult. Hospitality became a fragile treaty, renewed with every bite and every carefully chosen word. You sense remnants of this when you host today, moving through motions that feel pleasant but curiously rehearsed. You offer drinks because ancient hosts did. You gesture toward the comfortable seat because someone long before you believed seating arrangements could prevent misunderstandings. You stand a little straighter, speak a little more warmly, and try even subtly to prove you are safe to be around. The stakes are nowhere near as high now, yet the instinct remains. You imagine the fear of strangers running through medieval villages like a quiet undertow. Outsiders brought change, and change could unsettle communities built on delicate balances. Yet refusing hospitality could stain your reputation, marking you as a person lacking virtue, someone unworthy of trust. So villagers learned to welcome strangers with controlled generosity, offering enough kindness to appear honorable while keeping a careful watch for signs of danger. You feel yourself reenacting that ancient dance each time you greet someone new. You smile, even if cautiously. You speak gently, even if uncertain. You offer small comforts because doing so feels like the right way to bridge the unknown, a habit carried through generations of people who had far more to fear than awkward conversation. And as you share space with someone unfamiliar, settling into polite rhythm, you follow the old script shaped by fear, pride, and the need to be seen as honorable in a world that rarely gave second chances. You step into a room and instantly sense how much space is yours and how much belongs to everyone else. You shift to one side if someone stands too close. Lean back a little when a stranger speaks with too much enthusiasm, or angle your body just enough to protect whatever sliver of privacy modern life still allows. You do it without thinking. But these instincts were carved long before the idea of personal space became a polite guideline. They were forged in medieval towns where privacy was rare, precious, and sometimes suspicious. You imagine a medieval house where walls are thin, rooms are shared, and the very idea of being alone feels like a luxury reserved for nobles or hermits. Families sleep in the same chamber, share the same fire, and overhear each other's conversations because there is simply no way not to. Privacy, as you think of it, barely exists. Instead, people carve out small personal boundaries through behavior, habits, and the ability to pretend they have not noticed something, even when it happens 2 feet away. You picture a villager stepping outside, not for fresh air, but for a moment of solitude that the cramped home refuses to offer. They walk toward the well or the edge of the fields, clutching the quiet like something fragile. Every villager understands this quest instinctively and politely pretends not to see. Respecting small moments of distance becomes a social skill, even when physical privacy is impossible. You feel hints of this when you step outside to think, or when you pause before entering a room where someone else sits quietly, sensing that the moment belongs to them. You imagine the crowded markets where people brush past one another constantly, jostling through narrow lanes with barely enough room to breathe. Medieval people developed sharp awareness of bodies, gestures, and intentions because getting too close could imply many things at once. Proximity could be friendly, threatening, flirtatious, or rude. A misread glance might spark gossip. A misplaced step could start a fight. Today, you still feel the subtle tension in crowded places, adjusting how you move to avoid trespassing into someone else's invisible boundary. You picture nobles who had more privacy but faced a different challenge. Their solitude carried political meaning. Closing a door could suggest conspiracy, disloyalty, or secrets important enough to hide. So even privacy had rules. Doors were often left open during meetings, and conversations happened in plain view simply to avoid suspicion. You sense a faint echo of this when you leave a door ajar during certain interactions, or when you instinctively step into a visible space before making a private phone call. You are protecting the social script without realizing it. You imagine how medieval people learned to guard small personal belongings with almost ritualistic care. A bowl, a knife, a pouch, anything that belonged to them became an island of privacy in a sea of shared life. Touching someone else's things without permission was a serious violation. You carry that instinct when you hesitate before moving a stranger's bag, when you keep your belongings close in public, or when the smallest intrusion into your personal items feels oddly intimate. You picture the communal bathhouse, lively places where privacy dissolved entirely, replaced by a strange mix of vulnerability and normalcy. People adapted because they had no other choice. Yet, even their boundaries existed in the way people spoke, avoided staring, or created conversational distance. You feel echoes of that old etiquette in the way you avert your eyes in gyms, locker rooms, or any shared space where everyone pretends to be only minimally aware of one another. You move through your world, believing your sense of personal space is modern, shaped by convenience and comfort. Yet every instinct you follow was carved from centuries of negotiation with cramped homes, busy streets, suspicious politics, and communal living. The medieval world taught people to guard what little privacy existed and to respect the small boundaries others fought to preserve. And without realizing it, you navigate space the same way, carrying ancient habits into every room you enter. You walk into your workplace and immediately slip into an invisible maze of habits that feel natural but strangely rehearsed. You greet certain people with more formality than others. You speak differently depending on who stands near you, and you instinctively understand which conversations belong in the open and which belong whispered in cautious corners. You do all this without thinking, as if modern office culture wrote these rules, but the script is much older. It comes from medieval hierarchy, a world where status shaped every motion, every tone, every breath taken in the presence of someone higher on the social ladder. You imagine a medieval court where people gather in carefully arranged clusters, each group positioned according to rank. No one stands too close to the nobility unless invited, because that would suggest ambition or foolishness, and neither tends to end well. People measure their steps with the precision of dancers, moving in ways that reveal deference or confidence, depending on who watches. Even gestures carry meaning. A bowed head communicates respect. A raised chin hints at pride. A misplaced glance can unravel months of carefully maintained balance. You feel echoes of this when you speak to your boss and find your vocabulary subtly changing. Your sentences become polished, your tone smoother, as if some ancient reflex reminds you to demonstrate respect. Medieval villagers once approached their lords with the same shift in voice, not because they enjoyed performing humility, but because hierarchy demanded visible acknowledgement. You may not kneel, but your posture still adjusts. You imagine a medieval workshop where apprentices watch the master craftsman with a mix of admiration and fear. They learn when to ask questions and when to stay silent, observing unwritten rules that keep the space running smoothly. The master's mood shapes the rhythm of the day, and everyone adapts instinctively because upsetting the balance could lead to lost favor or lost livelihood. You feel the distant hum of this when you gauge someone's tone before speaking, reading the room the way those apprentices read the workshop. You picture the feasting hall, a long table divided by rank. Seats nearest the host belong to those with influence, while those farther down hold people whose opinions drift quietly into the background. Today, you still sense these invisible seats when you enter a meeting room and notice how people choose where to sit. Some take the head of the table without hesitation, while others gravitate toward the periphery, comfortable watching rather than leading. No one announces these roles, yet everyone follows them. You imagine scribes who learn to address nobles with polished phrases, careful not to imply too much familiarity. Their letters balanced respect with clarity, navigating the fragile boundary between confidence and presumption. You feel this when you compose an email and realize you are editing your greeting, softening a phrase, or adding a polite closure even though you do not speak like that anywhere else. You think of medieval merchants negotiating deals with wealthy patrons. They smiled, nodded, and never pushed too quickly. They learned to read temperaments, to sense when authority shifted, and to adjust their behavior to protect their standing. You perform a softened version each time you navigate office politics, steering around personalities, smoothing over disagreements, and making sure you understand who influences what. None of this feels medieval, yet it is. The old structure lingers beneath your routines, shaping how you move through professional spaces. You live in a world where hierarchy is subtle rather than carved in stone. Yet your instincts still lean toward the patterns born in courts, halls, workshops, and marketplaces. And every time you measure a word, adjust your posture, or read a room before stepping into it, you echo the quiet rules of rank that once shaped entire societies. You greet someone with a quick smile, a small wave, or a polite hello, and the moment passes as lightly as a breath. Farewells drift out just as easily. Soft goodbyes and see you layers that feel like simple social glue. You barely notice how these gestures shape the day, yet each one carries the faint outline of older rituals born in medieval streets where greetings could determine who lived peacefully, who offended someone unintentionally, and who needed to explain themselves before tensions grew sharp enough to attract attention from the entire village. You imagine walking into a medieval marketplace where greetings act as tiny shields. A polite acknowledgement proves you have peaceful intentions. A friendly word shows you are not hiding anything beneath your cloak. People exchange blessings, short phrases that hover between courtesy and mutual reassurance. No greeting is ever meaningless. Every phrase carries a subtle message, a promise not to cause trouble. You still feel a sliver of that when you nod at a stranger on the sidewalk. Your smile, a small sign that you are simply passing through. You picture neighbors calling out to each other with predictable phrases, each one like a password confirming that everything is normal. In a world where rumors could spiral into full-scale confusion, politeness became a stabilizing force. Greetings helped prevent misunderstandings. Farewells ensured no one misread the end of a conversation as a slight. You sense echoes of this when you add a quick "we'll have a good one" to avoid sounding abrupt, or when you soften a goodbye with a gentle tone, even if you are in a hurry. You imagine travelers arriving at a village boundary. A greeting is required before they take a single step inside. Villagers watch closely, measuring posture, expression, and tone. A respectful greeting grants passage. A careless or missing one triggers suspicion. Today, you do not fear being turned away from a neighborhood because you forgot to nod. Yet, something inside you understands the importance of acknowledging others before entering their space. You say hello to someone's home with a quiet knock, or offer a greeting when stepping into an unfamiliar room. You picture farewells, too. Long, winding phrases meant to protect the person leaving. Medieval goodbyes often included blessings because the world outside felt unpredictable. You send people off today with far simpler words. Yet the instinct remains. You wish them safety, a good night, a comfortable rest. Without even realizing, you mirror old habits meant to guard travelers from unseen dangers. You imagine people carefully using polite titles, ones that highlight respect without crossing delicate boundaries. The wrong greeting could insult someone's rank. The wrong farewell could imply dismissal. Medieval etiquette demanded gentle precision in these interactions. You do not worry about lords or ladies anymore. Yet you still adjust your phrasing based on who you speak to. Your voice grows softer with elders, warmer with friends, more formal when you sense authority. The old hierarchy whispers beneath every small change in tone. You see medieval boldness, too, in the way farewells sometimes stretched into long exchanges simply because no one wanted to appear rude. You feel this today when you say goodbye at least 3 times before actually leaving, lingering in doorways, repeating parting phrases because ending a conversation abruptly feels strangely harsh. You move through your day believing these habits belong wholly to the present. Yet every greeting, every nod, every farewell carries the old rhythm of medieval life, a world where courtesy kept peace, protected relationships, and softened the edges of daily danger. And with each polite word you offer, you continue a tradition built by people who understood that kindness at the door often meant survival far beyond it. You hear yourself repeating certain phrases so casually that they slip out before you even realize they formed in your mouth. You say fingers crossed or speak of luck as if it were a shy creature easily startled by human confidence. You mutter knock on wood, say bless you, or throw out little protective sayings your family passed down without ever explaining. These phrases feel harmless, almost playful. Yet each one carries the lingering breath of medieval superstition, shaped by people who lived in a world where fate seemed personal and invisible. Forces hovered just beyond the edge of understanding. You imagine villagers gathered in a dim cottage, lit only by a fire that crackles with a temper of its own. They live in a world where sickness arrives without warning. Harvests turn on a single cold night, and misfortune feels like an impatient guest. Words hold power here. People believe speaking something aloud can tempt or guide fate. So they create phrases to soften their statements, to protect themselves from sounding too sure about anything. These phrases become verbal charms, tiny rituals wrapped in everyday language. You picture someone praising a healthy child or a successful hunt only to immediately add a hasty protective phrase. They fear that compliments might attract attention from jealous spirits or wandering mischief. A simple phrase acts like a shield, a verbal fence they build around good fortune. You feel that same instinct when you say you are doing well, but quickly follow it with something that deflects the pressure of perfection, as if the universe might grow suspicious and investigate. You imagine medieval travelers whispering small blessings before leaving home. Not elaborate prayers, just short phrases meant to guard their path. These sayings will comfort into uncertainty. Today you echo those whispers when you tell someone to take care, your voice automatically softening around the words. You do not think about spirits or danger, yet the phrase carries the same subtle hope that the person will return safely. You picture a villager sneezing in a crowded square. Immediately, someone murmurs a blessing, a reflex born from the belief that a sneeze opened the body to wandering spirits or signaled a weakening of protective energy. People rush to offer words that act like a barrier, a quick patch against unseen threats. You still say bless you without any real awareness of its origins, but your tone carries a faint trace of the urgency medieval people once felt. You imagine rituals layered into phrases like charms disguised as politeness. People avoided speaking directly of death, misfortune, or illness, choosing coded language instead. They believed naming something could summon it, so they spoke in soft riddles. You still do this when you talk around certain subjects, couching heavy ideas in gentle words because part of you feels safer softening their edges. You picture farmers crossing their fingers to seal promises or to invite good luck, twisting their hands into symbols meant to invoke divine protection. The gesture travels through generations until the reason fades, but the motion remains. You feel it too when you cross your fingers without a second thought, as if the gesture still holds a tiny spark of possibility. You imagine entire villages held together by these phrases, each one a thread in the fabric of daily life. Words became tools to manage fear, uncertainty, and hope. People leaned on them the way you lean on familiar sayings now, trusting them even when you do not fully believe in their power. You speak these phrases lightly today, but each one carries the echo of a world where language was a shield, a charm, a way to shape the invisible forces people believed pressed close around them. And without noticing, you carry those old beliefs in the quiet corners of your speech, keeping centuries of superstition alive with every simple whispered phrase. You move through your year believing it is shaped by weather, work schedules, and a few holidays you learned as a child. But the rhythm that carries you from season to season was set long before your calendar existed. You follow a pattern carved by medieval life. A world where each month carried rituals, obligations, and warnings, and where time itself felt alive. You may plan vacations with modern precision, but your instincts still lean toward a cycle created when people read the world by candles, harvests, and church bells. You imagine the medieval New Year, not beginning in the cold stillness of deep winter, but in early spring when the world stirred awake again. Time restarted when blossoms returned, not when clocks declared it. You feel the faint echo of that instinct when the year only seems to truly begin for you once the air warms, as if your mind refuses to accept the fresh start until the earth itself agrees. You picture farmers moving through months named for the tasks that ruled them. Hay cutting, threshing, shearing, storing. Every season demanded different work, and people knew the calendar not by numbers, but by what needed doing. You sense a distant reflection of this when certain months trigger the urge to clean, to reset, or to prepare. Even when nothing in your modern world requires it, something inside you still follows the rhythm of long-vanished fields. You imagine the festivals sprinkled through the year, bright spots designed to break the monotony of labor. Feasts mark the solstices, saints' days, and harvest milestones, turning time into a series of moments people eagerly anticipated. These festivals became anchors in the medieval mind, tiny lighthouses guiding them through difficult days. You feel the softened version of that when holidays seem to divide the year into chapters, and when the stretch between them feels strangely long or oddly short, depending on how the seasons unfold. You picture a world where winter felt endless. People marked each small moment of returning light with quiet celebration because they needed the reassurance that nature was still on their side. Today, even with central heating and electric lamps, you feel a whisper of the same relief when days begin to stretch again, and you instinctively crave light in ways medieval people would instantly understand. You think of the medieval habit of treating certain months as unlucky for marriage, travel, or big decisions simply because tradition said so. These warnings passed through generations until they embedded themselves in culture. You may not avoid choices the same way, yet you still feel something peculiar about starting major plans in late winter or taking on new commitments during seasons that feel heavy. Old caution clings to your instincts, even without names for it. You imagine entire towns gathering for midsummer, setting aside work for celebration because tradition dictated joy at that moment. Today, you still expect summer to feel freer, lighter, as if centuries of old festivals left a warm imprint on the season itself. You do not need bonfires to feel that shift because the rhythm beneath the months tells you to loosen your shoulders and breathe easier. You picture the medieval year as a tapestry woven from survival, celebration, fear, and gratitude. Every season told people who they needed to be. You follow a gentler version of that script, but the old cadence shapes your expectations more deeply than you realize. And as you move from season to season, feeling the quiet tug of patterns older than your calendar, you carry the medieval year with you, woven subtly into the way you measure time itself. You move through your day, expecting certain things to feel fair. Lines should be followed, rules should apply to everyone, and consequences should make sense, even if they occasionally to annoy you. You rarely question where these expectations come from. Yet, they were shaped long before modern laws existed. They were born in medieval towns where order depended on punishments that were public, memorable, and sometimes creative in ways that make you grateful to live in the present. You imagine stepping into a medieval square where justice happens in full view of the community. People gather not out of cruelty, but because the entire system relies on shared understanding. Seeing a punishment teaches as much as hearing the rule. You may find the spectacle unsettling, but medieval villagers see it as necessary. A reminder that fairness must be visible to be real. You sense the faint echo of this today when you expect transparency from leaders or when hidden decisions feel wrong, even if the outcome is technically correct. You picture small offenses met with punishments designed to fit the crime. A baker caught cheating his customers might be forced to stand with burnt bread hanging around his neck. a visual reminder of dishonesty. A person guilty of spreading harmful rumors might have to walk through town carrying a symbolic object that exposes their behavior. Medieval justice aims to restore balance, not through severity alone, but through clarity. You feel the reflection of this when you hope modern consequences match the wrongdoing. A sense of proportion shaped by centuries of watching guilt and penalty mirror one another. You imagine the stocks standing in the square, a simple device that humiliated more than it harmed. People passing by could see who had violated the rules, but they also saw that the punishment ended. After a few hours, the offender returned to normal life. Medieval justice combined shame with reintegration. You still carry a softened version of this belief, expecting people to be held accountable, but eventually allowed to move on. You want balance, not endless punishment, even if your world expresses it through apologies and second chances instead of wooden restraints. You picture the role of community in enforcing fairness. Villagers watch each other closely, not to judge, but because order rests on shared responsibility. If no one reacts to wrongdoing, fairness dissolves. You feel a trace of that instinct when you speak up about something small like someone cutting in line or ignoring an unspoken rule. It is not about confrontation. It is about protecting the invisible framework everyone relies on. You imagine harsh punishments too, ones meant for serious crimes where the spectacle becomes a warning. Medieval life is fragile and threats to order are taken seriously because chaos could spread quickly. While you recoil from the brutality, you understand why people once believed fear was necessary. Today, the instinct survives in gentler ways. You expect big consequences for actions that endanger others, not out of cruelty, but because fairness feels incomplete without clear boundaries. You think about how medieval laws were often recited aloud in public spaces so that no one could claim ignorance. People needed to know the rules to follow them. You feel this when you want guidelines explained clearly. When confusing rules still irritate you even if you comply. Clarity feels like a right because once knowing the law meant survival. You picture the end of a punishment. The moment when the offender re-enters the crowd and everyone quietly agrees the matter is finished. The community returns to its rhythm trusting that fairness has been restored. You may not watch punishments play out in a square, but the same expectation lingers in you. When justice is carried out openly and proportionately, something inside you settles, and every time you demand fairness, transparency, and balance. You are echoing a medieval world that used public rituals of consequence to hold society together, shaping the very instincts that guide your sense of order today. You catch yourself performing tiny rituals without knowing why. You avoid walking under certain things. You hesitate before boasting about something going well. You feel a pulse of unease if you break an object that should probably not be broken. These habits seem harmless. Quirks you picked up from family or childhood stories, but the reasoning behind them stretches far back into medieval life, where misfortune felt like an active character lurking behind doors, chimneys, and shadows. You imagine a world where people cannot explain the sudden illness of a cow or the failed sprouting of a field. When the tools are simple and the sky is unpredictable, the safest explanation is that unseen forces are at work. Entire villages craft rituals to outsmart these forces, turning tiny actions into shields against chaos. You sense a faint echo of this instinct when you pause before saying something too hopeful, as if optimism itself might draw unwanted attention from whatever ancient listener still hovers nearby. You picture a medieval family placing iron at the threshold to ward off wandering spirits. Iron is strong, unyielding, and unnerving to anything that does not belong in the world of the living. You do not lay metal across your doorway today, yet you still feel that strange comfort in small barriers, a locked door, a closed curtain. Even a symbolic action like setting something in place at night carries the same quiet satisfaction. It is the belief that a simple act can keep misfortune at bay. You imagine villagers avoiding certain crossroads at dusk because legend says invisible things travel along those paths. Roads meet where energies collide, so people create rules to navigate them safely. Today you avoid dark alleys out of common sense. But there are also neutral spaces you treat with inexplicable caution. You stand a little straighter when passing an old tree or hesitate before stepping into a neglected part of town. It is not fear, just a subtle feeling inherited from centuries of shared superstition. You picture people knocking on wood long before the phrase existed as a playful habit. Trees once held spirits in folklore, and touching wood invited their protection or muffled your own too bold words. You still knock on wood lightly, half joking, but the gesture contains an older seriousness, a survival instinct wrapped in a friendly tap. You imagine someone spilling salt at a medieval feast, the grain scattering across a rough table. Salt is precious, so losing it feels like tempting misfortune. People quickly learn to counter it with a gesture, a pinch tossed over the shoulder, a symbolic payment to whatever lurking presence might take advantage. You still feel uneasy when something valuable falls or breaks unexpectedly, and you make small motions to fix the moment, even if they accomplish nothing practical. You picture entire communities shaping their behavior around omens, birds flying in strange patterns, cracks in stone, sudden silence in the forest. These signs help people to navigate a world filled with uncertainty. You feel a softened version when you read meaning into coincidences, feeling that the world is not entirely random, even if you cannot explain why a particular moment feels charged. You imagine the medieval belief that fortune favors those who respect rituals. People carry charms, whisper phrases, or avoid certain actions during key moments. Weddings, births, planting seasons. Today, you may not believe in omens, yet you still prepare spaces before important events, tidy your surroundings, or follow certain routines because they give the moment structure that feels older than you. You move through a life that seems free of superstition, but the instincts within you still follow ancient logic. They remind you that humans once lived in a world that felt alive, unpredictable, and watchful. And every cautious phrase, every small gesture, every tiny ritual is a quiet conversation with that old world carried forward through your hands without you ever noticing. You step into a store and expect prices to be clear, lines to be orderly, and transactions to feel predictable. You want fairness, transparency, a sense that no one is slipping a trick into the process. These instincts seem modern, shaped by receipts, scanners, and return policies crafted with corporate precision. Yet each expectation trails back to medieval marketplaces where chaos hummed beneath every exchange and fairness had to be carved out of noise, suspicion, and the occasional goat wandering through someone's stall. You imagine a medieval square alive with shouting merchants, the air thick with the smells of fresh bread, drying herbs, and animals that clearly missed the memo on personal hygiene. Buyers weave through the crowd, clutching coins with the caution of people who know a clever hand can pluck a purse faster than a blink. Fairness is not guaranteed here. It must be performed. Merchants loudly declare their honesty, not because they enjoy theatrics, but because reputation is their only advertisement. You feel the faint echo of this when you check online reviews before buying something, trusting voices that vouch for fairness, the way villagers once trusted gossip carried by word of mouth. You picture the wooden scales used to measure grain with delicate ceremony. Merchants weigh out handfuls while customers lean in, eyes narrowed, watching for tricks. A thumb on the scale is more than a small cheat. It is an insult, an accusation that the customer is foolish enough not to notice. Today, you still feel uneasy when you cannot see the process behind a charge or when a price seems to appear from nowhere. Transparency comforts you because long ago, fairness depended on visibility. You imagine the barkers who lure crowds with boasts and samples, offering slivers of cheese or sips of ale to prove their goods are genuine. This tradition survives in modern samples. Little pieces of persuasion handed out freely, echoing the medieval rule that a fair merchant stands behind their product. You do not think of medieval cheese when you accept a tiny cup of something in a grocery store, but you are participating in an old method of building trust. You picture disputes erupting over faulty goods or short measures. Medieval markets rely on public resolution. A town official might step in, testing the scale or inspecting the merchandise while a curious crowd gathers. Fairness becomes a shared ritual maintained by watchful eyes. You feel a quiet version of this when customer service resolves an issue in view of others or when you witness someone question a price and receive confirmation. The presence of witnesses still reassures you even in muted modern form. You imagine traders traveling between towns carrying not only goods, but also reputations. A merchant known for fairness benefits from goodwill that spreads along trade routes. You continue that tradition without realizing it. When you gravitate toward familiar brands, choosing trust over novelty, because humans have always relied on reputation to navigate uncertainty. You think of medieval bargaining, a dance between buyer and seller where both sides seek balance. No one wants to lose face or push too hard. You feel its softened imprint when you negotiate a price, ask for a discount, or compare costs across stores. Even when fixed prices remove the performance, the instinct to seek a fair exchange remains. You picture market rules established by towns, not out of bureaucracy, but out of necessity. Standard measures, quality checks, limits on where stalls can be placed. These rules protect fairness in a world that would otherwise tip into disorder. You still expect governing structures to protect you from being cheated, from small transactions to large commitments. Because fairness has long been a communal promise. And every time you read a label, check a price, or trust a seller, because something about the exchange simply feels balanced, you are echoing the rhythms of medieval trade, carrying forward the old belief that fairness is not automatic. It is something shaped by people, protected by customs, and reaffirmed in every honest exchange. You sit at a table with friends or family, and without thinking, you wait until everyone has their plate before you lift your fork. You offer someone a bite of something you like, or you feel an odd pressure to divide snacks evenly, even when no one asks you to. These gestures seem like simple niceties, but their roots lie in medieval customs shaped by survival, suspicion, and the delicate dance of communal living. You are not just being polite. You are echoing rituals created when sharing food could reveal loyalty, forge alliances, or prevent disaster. You imagine a medieval table where people gather around a single pot, dipping spoons into a meal shared by the entire household. Food is precious, and eating together is more than convenience. It is a declaration of trust. Sharing means you belong. Withholding means something is wrong. Today, when you feel uneasy eating alone in a room full of people, part of that instinct comes from a time when isolation at mealtime signaled conflict or offense. You picture a lord hosting a feast, choosing where everyone sits with deliberate care. Those placed near him enjoy honor and safety. Those pushed farther away understand their ranking wordlessly. Sharing bread with someone, literally tearing from the same loaf, becomes a quiet pledge of peace. You feel this echo when you offer someone a piece of what you are eating, even if you barely know them. The gesture feels intimate because it once carried real social meaning. You imagine villagers offering food to guests, not out of generosity alone, but because hospitality protects the household from gossip and ill will. A visitor who leaves unfed might speak poorly of their host, and reputations matter more than gold. You still sense the softened version of this when you push snacks towards someone who insists they are not hungry, because feeding a guest feels like a duty older than you can name. You picture meals in medieval taverns where sharing drinks or plates signals camaraderie. Travelers join strangers at communal tables, and for a brief moment, they share more than stew. They share stories, warmth, and protection from the dangers outside. Today, you feel the ghost of that camaraderie when you instinctively pass around a bowl of appetizers at a gathering, letting everyone join the same moment through a shared bite. You imagine parents teaching their children strict rules about taking only their portion. Food supplies must last through seasons, not just days. Overindulgence is dangerous. Selfishness threatens the group. These lessons become deep instincts. You honor them when you take a modest serving first or check whether others got enough before reaching for seconds. It feels like politeness, but it also carries the weight of survival learned through generations. You picture the unease surrounding the last piece of anything. No one wants to take it first. In medieval times, this hesitation showed respect, signaling that others deserved a chance. Today, the last slice of cake or final roll sits untouched until someone finally breaks the tension. It is not about hunger. It is about centuries of people proving humility by waiting. You imagine sacred meals where food carries symbolic weight. Bread and salt offered at the door, herbs tied to festivals, or shared dishes marking important transitions. These customs sink into culture even after their meaning fades. You feel them when certain foods appear on holidays, not because someone explained the symbolism, but because the tradition feels right in a way that resists questioning. You move through modern meals with ease. Yet every small gesture echoes a world where sharing food was a map of relationships, power, fear, and trust. You follow the ritual without realizing its age, each bite woven with memories of tables long forgotten, where food was more than nourishment. It was the glue that held communities together, and in many quiet ways it still is. You meet someone new and feel your body shift subtly, almost automatically, into a posture of harmlessness. You smile, soften your voice, reveal your hands without thinking. You stand far enough away to seem respectful, yet close enough to seem open. These small signals flow out of you like instinct, but they were shaped in a world where first impressions could decide whether two strangers became friends, allies, or problems best avoided before sunset. You imagine medieval villages where people approach each other slowly, announcing their presence with deliberate friendliness. A raised hand, palm open, becomes a universal sign of peace. No weapons, no hidden intentions. You still use this gesture today, waving at someone across a parking lot or lifting your hand to greet a neighbor. The motion feels casual, but it's original. Purpose was survival. You picture travelers meeting on rural roads edged with forest. They speak in gentle tones, offering light conversation about weather or travel, anything to ease the tension of chance encounters. The wrong tone could suggest bragging, boasting, or challenge. The right tone assures both sides that this meeting will remain uneventful. You echo this when you make small talk in elevators or greet strangers with a friendly nod, smoothing the edges of shared spaces that might otherwise feel sharp. You imagine families forming bonds with newcomers through simple rituals. Offering a drink, a meal, or a place near the fire turns a stranger into something safer. Hospitality is not just kindness. It is a strategy to reduce threat. Today, you still offer water, coffee, or a snack to guests in your home. Not because you fear conflict, but because hospitality softens the distance between people the way it always has. You picture knights removing their helmets when approaching others, exposing their faces to show trust. Hidden eyes could imply danger. Revealing one's face was a vulnerable gesture, a promise of honesty. You feel a faint echo of that when you remove sunglasses during a conversation or when you instinctively pull back a hood indoors. You are not holding a sword, yet your instincts still follow the old logic. You imagine villagers clasping forearms instead of hands, a greeting sturdy enough to check for concealed blades. This ritual evolves into friendlier gestures over time, but its purpose remains to show openness and vulnerability. When you hug a friend or pat someone's shoulder or offer a handshake, you are demonstrating trust through touch, continuing a message once meant to prevent violence. You picture people exchanging harmless details about their lives, little stories that reveal origins, families, trades. These rituals allow others to place you within the social map. Knowing someone's background lowers uncertainty and builds connection. Today you mirror this when you share where you grew up, what you do, or how your day has been. The details seem trivial, but they are old keys to familiarity. You think of medieval feasts where toasting together signals alliance. Raising a cup in unison proves no one intends harm. The drink is shared, the moment synchronized. You still feel the warmth of that ritual when you clink glasses with friends or raise a cup in celebration. It is not just a gesture. It is a vow of goodwill hidden beneath laughter. You imagine travelers exchanging simple tokens, small objects meant to show peaceful intentions, a ribbon, a carved piece of wood, anything symbolic enough to convey harmlessness. You sense the softened version of this when friends share inside jokes, bracelets, playlists, or photos. These small exchanges still say the same thing. I am with you, not against you. You move through your world believing your friendliness is personal preference. But beneath every soft smile, an open gesture lies a memory of a time when signaling peace was essential. When every interaction began as a negotiation between caution and connection, and with each gentle greeting, you continue the ancient ritual of turning strangers into something safer, echoing a world that taught humans to survive by choosing friendship over fear. You notice the way you form habits, how certain routines cling to you even when they no longer serve any real purpose. You lock your door twice, check the stove before leaving, arrange objects in places that feel safe, even if you cannot explain why those places matter. You think these quirks belong only to you, shaped by personality or upbringing. yet they follow patterns older than your language. They trace back to a time when survival depended on predictable behavior, when the smallest mistake could turn an ordinary day into trouble that spread faster than anyone could contain. You imagine a medieval cottage where the family wakes before dawn, moving through a sequence of actions practiced so often they become second nature. Someone checks the embers. Someone inspects the food stores. Someone listens for weather that might threaten crops or comfort. Life depends on habits learned through caution. Forgetting a single step could mean spoiled food, cold nights, or illness creeping in. You feel the echo of this when you repeat morning routines with near reverence, as if skipping one small task might throw the entire day off balance. You picture a villager tying the same knots every time they secure their roof or pack their goods for market. The knot is not just practical, it is a ritual. It reassures them that danger will not slip through cracks they failed to seal. You perform a modern version of this when you tighten something one extra time or check a latch repeatedly, knowing deep down that certainty feels safer than speed. You imagine communities preparing for winter with a rhythm carved from centuries of repetition. They gather firewood in predictable amounts, store grains in specific places, and follow patterns so ingrained that breaking them feels reckless. You sense the softened version when certain months still inspire you to clean, reorganize, or prepare, even when your survival does not depend on it. The instinct to fortify your environment runs deeper than your lifestyle. You picture medieval roads where people travel only if they must, planning their routes with careful attention. They know which paths are safe at dawn, which villages welcome strangers, which forests hide danger after dark. Planning becomes habit, and habit becomes protection. Today you plan your days with similar caution, mapping routes, estimating time, and preparing for what might happen. It feels modern, but the instinct to foresee trouble is old and stubborn. You imagine the countless small tasks done daily simply because not doing them invites risk. People store tools in the same places, speak the same warnings to children, check the same corners of their homes. These rituals keep the world predictable. You feel this every time you place your belongings in consistent spots or repeat instructions without realizing how old that impulse truly is. You picture medieval fears shaping habits so thoroughly that they become invisible. People avoid certain areas at night, close shutters before storms, and keep water within arm's reach even indoors. You see the faded version when you leave lights on in specific spaces or keep certain objects ready out of instinct rather than need. These are not just routines. They are echoes of survival strategies built into human behavior. You imagine families passing habits from one generation to the next, each member learning patterns without questioning the logic behind them. The habits carry wisdom even when the reasons fade. You follow similar paths when you adopt routines from parents or grandparents, repeating actions they likely inherited from someone long before they could name the source. And as you move through your life, forming habits you rarely examine, you carry the imprint of a world where consistency once meant safety, where ritual offered control, and where people survived because they learned to repeat the actions that protected them. Those medieval strategies live quietly inside you, shaping your routines in ways you feel but do not always see. You move through your day surrounded by rules no one remembers agreeing to, yet you follow them with surprising loyalty. You hold the door for someone, even if they are questionably far away. You avoid sitting in the one chair that feels unofficially reserved for someone else. You wait your turn for something no one is actually guarding. These habits drift through your life like faint ghosts of expectations you never noticed forming. But their roots lie in medieval customs that refuse to die, clinging to the present with the quiet determination of ivy on an old stone wall. You imagine a medieval town where people invent rules simply to keep their world from sliding into confusion. These rules feel small but essential. Do not sit at the Lord's table. Do not use the best cup unless serving an honored guest. Do not disturb the village's communal tools. Over time, people forget the origin, but keep the behavior. You sense that same lingering logic when you avoid taking the best slice of anything or wait to claim a seat that feels like it belongs to someone else even though it objectively does not. You picture villagers following routines with unwavering dedication. They sweep the doorway in a particular direction, hang herbs above certain thresholds, or keep water placed near windows for reasons no one fully remembers. These gestures began as practical or spiritual needs, but as centuries pass, they become traditions kept simply because they belong there. You echo this when you place objects in familiar spots or decorate certain spaces the same way each year without questioning why it feels right. You imagine expectations surrounding clothing that never truly disappeared. Medieval people wore specific colors to show status or allegiance. And even after the meaning fades, the categories remain. You feel the faint residue when you choose certain outfits for specific situations because they feel appropriate. No one enforces the rule. Yet you follow it because tradition whispers through your instincts louder than any written guideline. You picture communities assigning invisible ownership to spaces. A bench near the well belongs to the elders. A seat near the fire belongs to the one who stokes it. Everyone knows these unspoken arrangements, and no one dares disrupt them. You sense the modern echo when you walk into a break room and instantly avoid the chair that clearly belongs to someone who has unknowingly claimed it through sheer habit. You imagine medieval homes with rules passed quietly from parent to child. Some rules are born from danger, others from personal preference. But after enough seasons, no one remembers which is which. You still follow similar inherited guidelines. Do not put certain things on the table. Do not enter a room without announcing yourself. Do not do specific tasks at night. These rules feel strangely important even when they have no logical purpose anymore. You picture markets where people form lines not because anyone told them to, but because crowding causes too many arguments. The line becomes tradition, not law. Today you join a queue automatically. Even when there is no sign, no rope, and no one enforcing order, the tradition governs the moment long before your mind catches up. You imagine festivals structured around customs that lost their original meanings centuries ago. Torch parades meant to ward off winter spirits become simple celebrations of light. Bread rituals meant to honor local gods become charming seasonal traditions. You participate in similar events, enjoying them without understanding why the world insists they belong exactly where they are on the calendar. You move through a life filled with behaviors that seem harmlessly modern. Yet they were shaped in medieval streets, homes, and halls where people needed rules to keep uncertainty from taking over. These customs traveled through generations not by necessity, but by memory, by habit, by the satisfying comfort of familiarity. And each time you follow one of these forgotten rules without thinking, you keep the stubborn heartbeat of those ancient traditions alive. Carrying the past quietly into the present, you move through your day believing your choices belong entirely to the present, shaped by convenience, preference, and the slow drift of your own habits. You lock your door, stand in line, greet strangers with small smiles, pass dishes around a table, and whisper tiny phrases meant to soften luck or summon comfort. None of it feels ancient. None of it feels borrowed. Yet, as you look closer, you begin to see the faint outlines of a world long gone, its patterns stitched into your movements with a quiet persistence you never thought to question. You imagine stepping back through each chapter of your own routine as if walking through a series of medieval villages. Every gesture mirrors something once done for safety or survival. You realize that when you shake a hand, you still echo a time when strangers needed proof that no blade hid beneath a sleeve. When you line up patiently in a crowded place, you follow rules once created to keep chaotic markets from collapsing into shouting matches. When you avoid taking the last piece of food, you preserve the spirit of feasts, where generosity meant harmony and stinginess sparked gossip faster than a spark on dry straw. You picture yourself clinking glasses with friends, feeling the soft chime that once promised the wine was safe to drink. You nod politely, following the old choreography of gestures that prevented misunderstandings in a world where pride and honor were quick to catch fire. You sense how certain greetings still carry the shape of ancient caution, revealing empty hands or familiar smiles to show you come in peace. Every farewell you soften, every blessing you mutter after a sneeze, every small joke about luck carries the weight of people who believe the world listened closely to their words. You imagine the medieval calendar humming underneath your modern one, pulling you through seasons with subtle pressure. You clean, prepare, and reorganize when the year turns, not because you must, but because centuries of ritual have taught your body the rhythm of renewal. You distrust long, dark nights in ways you cannot name. You chase sunlight as if remembering a time when warmth meant survival. You picture your habits forming in layers, some from your family, many from tradition, and countless from ancestors who shaped their lives around danger, scarcity, and community. Their routines survive in your instinct to double-check, to tidy, to schedule, to prepare. Even the way you choose seats in certain rooms or avoid others carries the echo of superstitions meant to ward off harm long forgotten, yet stubbornly alive. You imagine the rituals of fairness that ruled medieval markets still guiding how you feel about prices, promises, and trust. You want the scale to be visible. You want the exchange to feel honest. You expect truth to stand in daylight where everyone can see it. These instincts were carved in public squares filled with merchants who earned their reputations through transparency, not paperwork. You picture all of these threads weaving together as you move, subtle and constant. You were not taught most of these behaviors deliberately. You inherited them the way you inherit a familiar path through woods you never consciously chose to walk. They linger because they worked. They carried people through hunger, fear, celebration, and change. They shaped the unspoken agreements that allow strangers to coexist without suspicion. You begin to realize something quietly profound. The medieval world never fully ended. It shifted, softened, and reshaped itself into the framework of your daily life. It lives in the tiny rituals you repeat without noticing, in the ways you protect yourself, greet others, seek fairness, and move through shared spaces with old instincts disguised as politeness. And as you continue through your day, you carry that history with you. A whisper from the past guiding your choices while you imagine yourself entirely modern, unaware that you walk side by side with centuries you cannot see.